welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something, well, something that really challenges how we think about our own minds. If you're listening now, you're having thoughts, maybe beliefs, perceptions. You're dealing with what philosophers call mental content.
Right. It seems like the most basic thing, the most certain thing about our experience.
Absolutely. It feels as solid as, gravity. But the source material we're diving into today argues that this certainty, it might just be misplaced.
That's right. The usual starting point, the thing everyone basically agrees on, is this content platitude. Like when you see something or think something or even dream something, there's a what there, a content.
You believe the sky is blue or you want that sandwich, that part seems undeniable.
Exactly. But the radical idea here is, well, maybe it is deniable. Maybe when you look closely, mental content starts to look like an illusion.
Not just like, oh, I made a mistake, but a proper systematic illusion.
Yeah.
Like a stage magic trick.
Precisely. Like the person sawn in half. It looks real, it's convincing, but it's an appearance. The argument is that mental content, under scrutiny, has all the defining features of these classic illusions. It seems to exist, but maybe doesn't. Not in the way we assume.
Okay, wow. That's a huge claim. We definitely need to break this down carefully, step by step.
Agreed.
So the plan is, first, forget our gut feelings for a moment. We need really clear, theory-neutral definitions. What is content? What is an illusion?
Yeah, get the toolkit ready before we use it.
That's the mission for this deep dive. Define the terms, find the boundaries, and then see if content really does look like it belongs on the illusion side. Right, definitions. The analysis in the source is super careful here, which makes sense. We need to know exactly what we're talking about.
Right. We need examples, positive and negative, to kind of fix the meaning, regardless of your background philosophical beliefs. Let's start with mental content.
Okay. What are the clear cases of content?
Well, the most obvious is perception. You see a cup on the table. The cup, or maybe the visual information about the cup, that's the content.
And importantly, this includes when perception goes wrong.
Yes, absolutely. Misperceptions, hallucinations, they still have content.
Right.
If you hallucinate a pink elephant, the content is, there is a pink elephant. It's false, but it's still a specific content.
Got it. What else?
Thinking itself, judgments, making inferences, that little voice in your head.
Like thinking, oh, I need to get milk later. The content is the proposition. I need to get milk later.
Exactly. And this covers all those classic propositional attitudes, believing that something is true, fearing that something might happen, desiring that things were different.
Even emotions directed at things, like loving someone or being afraid of spiders.
Yep. If you love Mary, Mary is the object, your state is about her, contentful. Fear of spiders, the spider is the object. It's about that directedness, that aboutness. Philosophers sometimes call it intentionality.
Okay, that seems pretty broad. So where's the line? What are the clear examples of things that don't have content?
This is where it gets clearer, I think. First, obviously non-mental states. Being tall, being tanned, no content there.
Sure.
But the more interesting cases are mental states that definitely feel like something, they have phenomenology but aren't about anything specific.
Like being hungry. That feels like something. And I'm hungry for food. Isn't that about food?
That's a common thought, but the analysis argues no. Psychosomatic states like hunger, thirst, nausea, feeling tired. They have strong feelings, but they don't represent a state of affairs that can be true or false.
So my belief there's food in the fridge can be true or false. My hunger just, it doesn't represent the fridge contents correctly or incorrectly.
Exactly. It motivates action, sure, but it doesn't have that kind of correctness condition tied to the world in the same way a belief does. And maybe the clearest negative examples are moods.
Like feeling depressed or anxious.
Yeah, right. Generalized anxiety or just feeling kind of restless or low. These are definitely mental states. They feel like something, often intensely, but they aren't directed at a specific thing. A phobia of spiders is about spiders contentful. Free-floating anxiety isn't about any particular thing.
Okay, I think I see the distinction. No specific object or proposition it's pointing towards.
That's the idea. Lack of directedness, lack of truth or satisfaction conditions, that helps pin down what we mean by content.
So, looking back at the positive examples, perception, thought, belief, the source says they share three key features, three reliable signs of content. First one is apparent worldliness.
Yeah, this is a classic point. Content usually doesn't feel like it's just inside your head, right? It feels like it's out there in the world.
Even if it's wrong, like a hallucination.
Even then, the hallucinated pink elephant appears to be in the room, out there, A belief that Paris is the capital of Spain seems to be about the actual cities and countries. It presents itself as worldly.
Okay. And that leads naturally to the second feature, satisfiability.
Right. Content can be right or wrong. Beliefs can be true or false. Perceptions accurate or inaccurate. Desires fulfilled or unfulfilled. Commands obeyed or ignored.
If a state can't be judged in this way, satisfied or unsatisfied, then it's not content in this specific sense.
That's the criterion being used here. It needs that potential link to correctness conditions in the world.
And the third one sounds a bit more technical, determinacy.
It is, but it's crucial. It means the content has to be specific enough that you can, in principle, express it accurately using a definite phrase or sentence. It can't be hopelessly vague or open-ended.
So if I see my cat, the content isn't just some furry thing, it's that specific cat.
Exactly. Even if the content is nonverbal, like perceiving a shade of red, it has to be a determinate shade, not just some reddish color. This tackles a big philosophical headache called the disjunction problem, where it's hard to pin down exactly what a state is representing if it responds to multiple things. Content needs to be precise.
Okay. Worldly, satisfiable, determinate. That's our definition of content. Now, what about illusion?
Again, we need clear examples. The classics are the best guide.
Like the Miller-Lyer illusion, those lines at the arrowheads.
Yep. Two lines are the same length, but they absolutely look different. That's a paradigm case. Or the Ames room.
Where people seem to magically grow or shrink just by walking across the room.
Right, because the room's geometry is distorted in a way that tricks your perception. And maybe the Ames window, too, that trapezoid shape that looks like it's swinging back and forth instead of rotating.
So the key things here are they're mere appearances. What you see isn't what's actually there.
Correct. The lines aren't unequal, the people aren't changing size. But critically, the appearance itself is robust.
And it's systematic and intersubjective. Meaning, if you set up the stimulus correctly, the Miller-Lyer lines, the Ames room view, pretty much everyone experiences the same illusion. It's reliably produced, it's shared, it's not just a random personal mistake.
Okay, so this reliability is what makes it different from just getting something wrong or having a weird dream. Exactly. Normal perception in good conditions isn't an illusion. Sensations like pain, if you feel pain, you are in pain, subjectively speaking. Moods, as we said, aren't illusions.
And even hallucinations or misperceptions don't quite count as illusions in this technical sense. Why not?
Because they often lack that systematic, stimulus-driven, shared quality. A hallucination might be triggered internally or randomly. The Ames room illusion works because of the specific external setup reliably tricking the visual system in a predictable way for most observers. Illusions, in this sense, are tied to the stimulus conditions.
Got it. So content. Worldly, satisfiable, determinate. Illusion. Systematic, shared, persistent mere appearance. Now for the big question. Does content fit the illusion profile?
Okay, this is where the argument gets really interesting and maybe uncomfortable. We take those features of illusion and apply them one by one to mental content.
And the first feature is anomalousness. Unexpectedness. How is content anomalous? It feels like the most expected thing in the world.
From the first-person view, yes. But the argument asks you to step back, take a third-person scientific perspective. From that view, the existence of genuine, determinate, meaningful content inside a physical system like the brain is, well, it's deeply puzzling, unexpected.
How so? We know brains are complex.
Incredibly complex. But they're biological machines, complex bags of mostly water, as the source puts it rather bluntly. How does firing patterns of neurons, just electrochemical signals, suddenly give rise to the specific meaning democracy or the square root of 2? It's a huge leap.
This sounds related to the hard problem of consciousness, but focused just on the meaning part.
Exactly. They're related puzzles, but distinct. Even setting aside the feeling of consciousness, just explaining about whimness or meaning in purely physical terms is a massive challenge. Why brain neurons, specifically?
What do you mean?
Well, you have neurons in your spinal cord coordinating complex movements. You have a whole network in your gut, the enteric nervous system managing digestion. Lots of complex signaling. But we don't usually say your spine believes things or your gut desires pizza. So why does adding more complexity in the head suddenly flip a switch and create genuine, determinate content like Napoleon lost at Waterloo, it seems? Arbitrary. Anomalous. Especially when we know from cybernetics and robotics that you can get very complex, seemingly intelligent behavior from machines that provably don't have internal content.
Think like a Roomba navigating a room. It acts as if it has a map, but it's just following simple rules.
A simple example, yeah, but the principle scales up. Sophisticated control systems can mimic intelligent behavior without needing internal representations in the sense we're discussing. This makes content look like an extra, unexpected ingredient from a purely engineering or biological perspective.
And this unexpectedness is reflected in philosophy's own struggles, right?
Yeah.
The whole naturalization program.
Absolutely. Since the 80s, a huge effort went into trying to explain how physical states could become contentful, using ideas like information flow or causal links or evolutionary function.
And verdict is?
It's widely considered to be in crisis. It hasn't really worked, for several reasons.
Okay, like what? First,
Limited scope. Most theories might offer a story for how a brain state represents, say, a nearby predator, something concrete, causal. But how does that kind of story explain your thoughts about abstract math or justice or hypothetical situations or fiction? The proposed mechanisms just don't seem to cover the full range of human thought.
right. Hard to see how evolutionary function explains my grasp of quantum physics.
Precisely. Second problem, pan-representationalism.
Meaning, representation is everywhere.
Kind of. If the criteria you use to bestow content, like responds reliably to X, are actually met by loads of things in nature, like a thermostat responding to temperature.
Then the thermostat has content. My liver cells responding to toxins have content.
That's the worry. If the theory forces you to say content is everywhere, in rocks and rivers and whatnot, then the concept becomes almost meaningless. It suggests the initial criteria were too broad, too weak. It doesn't capture what's special about mental content.
Okay. And the third failure, you mentioned determinacy earlier.
Yes, and this is maybe the killer technical problem. Remember, content needs to be precise, but attempts to ground content in purely natural relations like information or causation consistently fail to deliver that precision.
Can you give an example?
The classic is the frog snapping at flies. Its visual system fires for small, dark moving things. Is the content fly? Or is it flower bee or BB pellet or dark shadow?
Ah, because it snaps at all of them.
Right. The underlying physical mechanism is indiscriminate in that way. But if the content is this big or R list, it's not determinate, it's vague. And if naturalistic theories can't generate determinate content, they haven't actually explained the thing we experience as content.
So the scientific picture struggles to produce content, making its existence seem anomalous, unexpected.
That's the argument. It stands out as something not easily explained by our standard scientific toolkit. Hashtag tag 2.2 causal insulation, epiphenomenal appearance.
Okay, hallmark number 2 of illusions, causal insulation. In the Ames room, the appearance of shrinking doesn't actually cause the person's clothes to bunch up or anything. The appearance is separate from the real-world causal chain.
Exactly.
But this feels like the hardest sell for content. My desire for coffee causes me to get up. My belief the stove is hot causes me to avoid touching it. Content seems like the very thing that makes us do stuff.
It absolutely seems that way. That's the power of the illusion. But the argument here is that the underlying neural states are doing all the real causal work. The content itself, as philosophers understand it, might be causally cut off.
How can we even test that idea? That sounds like.
The classic way is through thought experiments, like the intentional zombie or swamp man.
Okay, walk me through Swamp Man. I've heard of it, but refresh my memory.
Right. So most mainstream theories of content and philosophy today are externalist.
Meaning content isn't just about what's in your head.
Correct. It also depends on your relationship to the outside world, often your history. So your thought water refers to H2O, partly because you've interacted with H2O, learned the word in an H2O-filled environment, and so on. The meaning is partly fixed by external factors.
Okay.
Now imagine lightning strikes a swamp, and by sheer fluke, it assembles a perfect atom-for-atom duplicate of you, Swamp Man.
Okay, physically identical.
Physically identical, same brain states, same structure. So Swamp Man stands up, walks out of the swamp, sees someone, and says, "Where's the nearest coffee shop?" It acts exactly like you would.
Right, because it has my brain.
It has your physical brain state. But according to externalism, because Swamp Man has no causal history, no past interactions with water or coffee or anything else, its brain states lack the content yours have. When it thinks the brain state you associate with water, it doesn't mean H2O because it has no connection to H2O. It might mean nothing, or maybe swamp goo that looks like that stuff.
Wait, so Swamp Man acts identically, even says I want coffee, but doesn't actually have the content I want coffee.
According to standard externalist theories, yes. Or at least not the same content you have.
But if it acts the same without the right content, doesn't that mean the content wasn't needed for the action in the first place?
Bingo. That's the causal insulation argument. The physical brain state did all the work of producing the behavior. The content, defined by those external relations, was irrelevant to the physical causation. It's insulated.
Okay, but couldn't content just be an effect, not a cause? Like, the brain state causes the action and causes the content, but the content doesn't cause anything itself. Epiphenomenal.
That's a common fallback, but the source argues it's even more insulated than that. Content, especially externalist content, isn't even caused directly by the local brain state. It's determined by historical or environmental facts outside the current physical system.
So it's not caused by the brain states now, and it doesn't cause the behavior now.
Exactly. It floats free of the immediate causal network governing your brain and body. It's like a label attached by the theorist based on history, not an active component in the machinery. A hole in nature's causal network, as the source puts it. Totally insulated. Hashtag 2.3 systematicity and persistence.
Okay, moving on. The next features of illusion are systematicity and persistence. These seem maybe easier to apply to content. Illusions are systematic, reliably produced. Content seems systematic too.
Absolutely. That's fundamental to how we think and communicate. If I ask, who was the first U.S. president? The content George Washington reliably pops into mind for many people. Language works because words systematically evoke related contents.
Even allowing for context and ambiguity.
Sure, context shapes content, but it does so in systematic ways. The rules of conversation, the way jokes work by playing with expected content, it's all systematic. And the source points out, even seemingly irregular content, like in dreams or certain mental health conditions, often shows underlying systematic patterns.
Like recurring dream themes or the specific kinds of thoughts and anxiety.
Exactly. Think about clinical psychology diagnoses rely on identifying systematic patterns in content. Panic attacks often involve contents about dying or losing control. Schizophrenia can involve specific, recurring types of auditory hallucinations. The appearance of content isn't random. It's highly structured and systematically triggered.
Okay, that makes sense. And persistence. Illusions stick around even when you know they're illusions. The Miller-Lyer lines still look unequal after you measure them.
And this seems powerfully true for content. There are philosophers, eliminativists, who genuinely believe content doesn't exist in the way we think.
Right.
But they don't report that the experience of having contentful thoughts disappears. They still experience beliefs as if they have content, desires as if they're directed at outcomes. The appearance persists despite the intellectual rejection.
That's a strong point. If it was just a theory we held, rejecting the theory should make the experience change, but it doesn't seem to.
Precisely. The fact that the feeling of contentfulness is so stubborn, so resistant to being thought away, is exactly what you'd expect if it were a deep-seated, persistent illusion produced by our cognitive architecture, rather than an accurate reflection of reality that we could simply choose to see differently. Hashtag 2.4, bound to a single mode of access.
All right, the final hallmark of illusion.
Yeah.
Being down to a single mode of access.
Yeah.
Like needing to view the Ames room from just the right people.
Yeah.
Change how you look, and the illusion breaks.
Yeah. And for content, the argument is that the only direct way we access it is through introspection, first-person awareness.
We just know what we're thinking or believing directly. We have to infer what others are thinking.
Right. But then the challenge comes, what about brain scanning? Those fancy fMRI studies that claim to be mind reading. Can't they see the content from the outside now? Doesn't that break the single access rule?
Yeah, if a scientist can scan my brain and say, he's thinking about a cat, haven't they accessed the content without using introspection?
It looks that way, but the source argues quite strongly that this is a misunderstanding of what those technologies do. They aren't directly reading the content.
What are they doing then?
They are inferential and statistical. Highly sophisticated pattern matching, basically. They're trained by showing people, say, pictures of cats, recording the brain activity, let's call it pattern Y, showing pictures of dogs, pattern Z, and so on, for thousands of trials.
Okay, so the machine learns pattern Y usually happens when there's a cat.
Exactly. So later, if they scan a new person and detect pattern Y, the algorithm makes a highly educated guess. The most probable cause of pattern Y, based on my training data, is that this person is seeing or thinking about a cat.
So it's not seeing the catness in the brainwaves. It's inferring the stimulus based on correlation.
Precisely. It's guessing the cause or the experimental condition, not decoding the intrinsic meaning or content of the brain state itself. The whole process presupposes the content, the researcher knows they showed a cat, to train the machine. It doesn't read content out. It predicts the stimulus associated with the pattern.
So Introspection remains the only game in town for direct access to the feeling of contentfulness.
That's the argument. And it fits with what happened in cognitive science historically, when psychology moved away from introspection as its main tool.
Right, behaviorism and then the cognitive revolution.
The theoretical representations, they started talking about algorithms, complex mathematical models, connectionist networks. They stopped looking like the simple determinate contents we experience introspectively. They became abstract, fragmented, context-dependent.
Which is exactly what you'd expect if the content we feel is an artifact of looking inwards through introspection and disappears when you try to access it differently.
Yes, step away from introspection, and you lose contact with content in the relevant sense.
Yeah.
It seems bound to that single first-person perspective. Hashtag tag 2.5 conclusion of the illusion argument. The argument is, mental content looks scientifically anomalous, it appears causally insulated, it's systematic, it's persistent even when doubted, and it seems only directly accessible via introspection.
And those 5 features, anomalousness, insulation, systematicity, persistence, single access, are precisely the defining features of classic robust illusions.
That's the core claim. Content ticks all the boxes for being an illusion.
So the conclusion is, the feeling of having specific thoughts, beliefs, desires with definite content. That feeling is real, but the content itself isn't an actual feature inside our minds. It's just a reliable appearance triggered by underlying neural activity.
Much like the appearance of the person changing size in the Ames room is reliably triggered by the actual room and the person moving, the neural events are the reality, the content is the appearance.
Wow, okay. So the biggest trick the mind plays isn't pulling rabbits out of hats. It's convincing us that the what of our thoughts is actually in there.
Right. Now, obviously, this conclusion is so counterintuitive that it faces some major pushback. The source anticipates and tackles 2 big ones.
Yeah, I can imagine. The first one must be just as ridiculous. I know I have thoughts. It's self-evident. Right. The too silly to believe objection.
Pretty much. The feeling that content is directly given in introspection, beyond any possibility of rational doubt. How can you argue against something that feels so immediately present?
How do you argue against it?
By questioning the authority of introspection itself, the illusionist says, wait a minute, how reliable is introspection really?
We think it's reliable.
We do, but there's a lot of evidence suggesting it's not. Think about your visual field again. Ask yourself right now, how much detail and color do you see across your entire field of vision?
Feels pretty complete, like a detailed picture.
That's what introspection tells you. But physiologically, you only have sharp, detailed color vision in a tiny spot in the center, the fovea. The rest is much lower resolution, less color. Your brain is constantly filling in the gaps, stitching it together, creating the illusion of a complete, detailed picture.
So introspection is feeding me a constructed image, not the raw data.
Exactly. And it does this seamlessly. You don't feel the construction happening. Another big area is confabulation,
where people make up reasons for their actions after the fact.
Right. Classic experiments show you can subtly influence someone's choice, then ask them why they chose it, and they'll confidently provide a plausible-sounding reason, a contentful belief or desire that had nothing to do with the actual cause. They genuinely believe that was their reason.
They introspect a reason that wasn't there.
Yes. And crucially, they can't tell the difference introspectively between a real reason and a confabulated one. If introspection were a perfect window onto our mental states, we wouldn't be fooled like this.
So the argument is, since introspection is demonstrably unreliable in some cases, vision, confabulation, and we can't tell from the inside when it's being reliable versus unreliable, we can't just trust its reports about content being given.
Exactly. The fallibility of introspection opens the door to reasonably doubting whether any content is truly given in the way intuition suggests. We accept the appearance of givenness, but question the reality behind it. Hashtag tag 3.2, the coherence challenge, cognitive collapse.
Okay, that tackles the gut feeling. But there's a more logical, philosophical objection, right? The coherence challenge.
Yes, this one's trickier. The objection goes like this. If you stand up and assert, mental content is an illusion, that assertion itself seems to be an expression of a belief. And that belief must have a content, namely the proposition mental content is an illusion.
So in the very act of denying content, you're using content. You presuppose the thing you're trying to deny. It's self-refuting.
That's the charge. It sounds like a knockout blow. But the illusionist has a reply. They argue the objection begs the question by assuming a particular view of belief.
What view is that?
What the source calls a deep theory of belief. This is the common sense idea that beliefs are actual things inside your head, maybe like sentences written in brain code or specific data structures in your cognitive architecture, and these internal things possess or contain the content.
Like having a little file in my brain labeled "content is an illusion."
Sort of, yeah. If you think beliefs are those internal content bearers, then yes, the coherence objection works. You can't have the file without having content.
So the illusionist needs a different way to think about belief.
Exactly. They need to reject the deep theory and adopt a shallow theory of belief, sometimes called a deflationary or dispositional account.
Okay, what does a shallow theory look like?
In a shallow theory, beliefs aren't internal objects with content. Instead, belief is just a way we talk about patterns of behavioral dispositions.
So my belief that it's raining isn't an internal sentence, it is raining. It's my disposition to grab an umbrella, say yes if asked if it's raining, avoid planning a picnic.
Precisely. It's a whole cluster of dispositions to act and speak in certain ways in certain contexts. The content part, "it is raining," isn't inside your head. It's more like a convenient linguistic tag we use from the outside to label that whole cluster of behaviors.
Like shorthand for describing the pattern.
Exactly. It's a tool for predicting and explaining behavior, for social coordination, not a description of an internal mental item.
Okay, so if belief is just a pattern of dispositions and content is just an external label for that pattern,
Yeah.
how does that solve the coherence problem?
Because when the illusionist asserts content is an illusion, they aren't reporting on an internal content-bearing state inside their head. They're simply exhibiting a complex behavioral disposition, the disposition to make that utterance in philosophical discussions, to argue in certain ways, etc.
So the statement itself isn't using internal content. It's just part of a behavioral pattern labeled externally with the tag "believes content is an illusion."
Correct. The assertion is part of the disposition, not a reflection of an inner contentful state. By adopting this shallow dispositional view of belief, the self-contradiction disappears. The illusionists can consistently assert their thesis as a description of how our talk about minds works or doesn't work, rather than getting caught in a loop about their own internal states.
Okay, so if the arguments hold and the objections can be met, where does this leave us? It seems like a pretty radical shift.
It is. The biggest immediate consequence is the explanatory shift. If content is an illusion, then that whole massive philosophical project of trying to naturalize content, trying to explain how physical stuff gets to have meaning just dissolves.
We stop looking for something that isn't there to be found.
Right. The problem wasn't that our theories were bad. The problem was the target itself was illusory. But the focus shifts to a new problem, the illusion problem.
Which is?
How do we explain the illusion itself? Why does it feel so strongly like we have content? What are the psychological mechanisms that generate this incredibly robust, systematic, persistent appearance? We move from metaphysics to cognitive science and psychology.
And the source hints at a dispositional approach to explaining the illusion, too.
Yeah, building on the shallow theory of belief. The illusion of content might be partly constituted by our incredibly strong, ingrained dispositions to talk and think using content terms, especially in introspection.
We're just so used to describing our inner life that way.
Exactly. We make these introspective reports, I believe X, I want Y, and crucially, we make them sincerely. There are no physiological signs of lying. And this sincerity, this lack of internal conflict, might lead to a kind of self-persuasion. I said it and I meant it, therefore the content must have been truly there.
And this ties into social cognition.
Very strongly. The argument suggests that the primary function of our folk psychology, our everyday talk about beliefs and desires, might be social coordination. Being able to quickly label someone's likely behavior with a content tag, he believes the bus is late, so he'll wait, is incredibly useful for navigating the social world.
So the illusion of content makes these useful social labels feel real and authoritative, helping us coordinate better.
That's a plausible hypothesis stemming from this view. The inner feeling reinforces the utility of the outer labeling system.
This means we have to completely reinterpret folk psychology, right? See it not as a description of inner reality, but as a practical, maybe socially evolved toolkit.
Yes. Embracing these deflationary or functional views of representation, concepts aren't mirrors inside the head. They're tools for interacting with the world and each other.
Which leads to some pretty deep questions about, well, us. Philosophical anthropology. What does it mean to be human if our brains don't actually contain content?
Right. Take our idea of being the rational animal. We think we act based on reasons, and reasons seem to be contentful propositions. The reason I took my umbrella is that I believe it will rain.
If that belief content isn't real, what happens to rationality?
We might need a different understanding of rationality, perhaps a more pragmatist one. Reasons aren't internal states, maybe, but public justifications offered within social practices. It's about how we use language to justify actions to each other, not about inner mental causes.
So legal responsibility, for example. It wouldn't depend on proving someone actually had the contentful belief this action is wrong, but on whether their behavior fits the public pattern that gets labeled that way.
That's the direction it points. Accountability shifts from hidden inner states to observable patterns of behavior and public norms of justification. It's a significant shift in how we'd understand moral and legal practices.
And finally, how does this relate to consciousness illusionism, the idea that subjective experience, qualia, is also an illusion?
There are strong parallels in the argument structure. Both content and phenomenal consciousness, qualia, are features of the mind that seem intuitively obvious from the first-person view, but are very hard to integrate into our third-person scientific picture of the world.
Anomalous, maybe causally puzzling.
Exactly. Now, they're logically distinct. You can arguably have non-conscious content, like an unconscious belief, or conscious states without content, like a mood. But both illusionist arguments suggest our ordinary deep view of the mind might be fundamentally mistaken about its core features, both the what content and the how, qualia.
It's a package deal of radical doubt about our intuitive picture of the mind.
It offers a potentially unified way to resolve several long-standing philosophical puzzles by suggesting the puzzles arise from trying to reify appearances. The reason we can't find content or qualia easily in the physical world might simply be because they aren't there as intrinsic properties of the physical world, only as systematic appearances generated by it.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given us, and you listening, a framework for understanding one of the most profound challenges to our self-conception. You're now equipped, at least, with the arguments to seriously question the reality of your own thoughts' content.
And that brings us to a final thought, something for you to consider. If, as we discussed, the primary function of this powerful, systematic illusion of content is to facilitate social coordination, to make us better predictors and interactors, what would it actually be like? What would our world look like if we lived in a society where that illusion was somehow truly vanquished? Could our complex social structures, our morality, our laws even survive without the shared feeling that our beliefs and desires are real, internal things?